A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today is the Alabama Attorney General protecting children. We talk about that with a conservative fella. Warrior Med is trying to get the miners to pay them $13 million, including for lost revenue during the strike. We're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we have a phone number and the line is open, folks. The line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might play it on the next program. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, though, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you can follow us online. We're anywhere you find anything online, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support does help us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. We have over 60 people, over 60 folks, dozens of folks giving us $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 a month to help us stay on the air. And that is our largest single source of funding. It's from listeners like you who reckon that it's worth what we're doing, getting this message out on the radio, on multiple commercial radio stations across the Tennessee Valley and across the South. So we appreciate that. Also, we could not do it without our union sponsors. We have several local unions that sponsor the program, and we appreciate their support. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program as an individual, make a one-time donation, or buy our new hat or pre-order our new shirts, then you can go to our website, tvlr.fm. You can get the shirts at tvlr.fm/store. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a union, you should get your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. DMs are open on all of our social media pages, and you can get my email from there. So, the first thing that this is something that I've been wanting to touch on for quite a while. I've had this little monologue on the show notes for, I think this is the third week now, and we're going to be able to get to it this week, and that's the material consequences of the culture war. And one of the things that we want to try to do on this program is to make people hip to the farcity, to the manufacturedness, to the nothing nature of the culture war. Which is to say that people on the radio, people in the picture box, they are purposely trying to rile you up about things that literally have no impact on your life. They're trying to make you mad at people just for existing. They're trying to make you mad about things that have no impact on your life. Things like Dr. Seuss's estate taking some racist cartoons out of print. Things like Minnie Mouse wearing a pantsuit for 1 month at one Disneyland location halfway across the world. That was said on this radio station to be indicative of the decline of the West. Mr. Potato Head's brand name being changed to just Potato Head. Not that Mr. Potato Head is no longer going to exist, but the umbrella brand is now Potato Head. This was a story for a long time. The gays getting married, trans folks existing and using the bathroom. These are all things that have no effect on your life.
Unless you're one of those people.
Unless you're one of those people, right. These things are not affecting you. And if it weren't for people on the picture box trying to make you mad about it, even if you had noticed it, you wouldn't have thought a second thing about it. You go to Disneyland and see Minnie Mouse in a pantsuit. You're not even going to think about it. It's not even going to register to you that anything changed. You're not even going to notice a difference, much less think that that is indicative of the decline of the West. It's silly, silly, silly things. But we do want to be clear that the response to these nothing stories, the response that people have, the things that they do when they are able to get people riled up about the gays getting married, about trans folks existing, the response to these things, they absolutely do have material and real-world impacts on folks, especially marginalized people. This has been about a month ago, but over in Ohio, over the July 4th weekend, a transgender man, somebody who transitioned from female, assigned female at birth, transitioned to male, was told by the campground that he was staying at that he ought to use the women's restroom because he was assigned female at birth. So he should use the women's restroom. And so he did that. But he looks like a man because he's a man. He's a transgender man. And so he looks like a man. But he did that because that's what the campground told him to do. Told him to use the women's restroom. And so he did that. And folks beat the crap out of him. He got a black eye. He was bruised because he looked like a man going to the women's restroom. And then the cops arrested him.
Wow. Wow, that is absurd and disgusting.
Yes. He was trying to just go about his life in the way he was trying to get as little of a reaction as possible.
Trying to avoid conflict. And he gets the crap beat out of him. Because of all this nonsense. Because of all this nonsense that people have riled up. Folks just want to use the bathroom, okay? He was arrested. On the abortion stuff, the Dallas Morning News reports that in Texas, doctors are already refusing to treat ectopic pregnancies, which are non-viable pregnancies that form outside of the uterus with an abortion. Doctors are already refusing to treat ectopic pregnancies with an abortion and sending women home to expel the fetus, which increases the risk of infection. And I've heard reports from other states as well, unfortunately.
The Texas Medical Association, from the Dallas Morning News, the Texas Medical Association wants regulators to step in after hospitals reportedly refused to treat patients with serious pregnancy complications for fear of violating the state's abortion bans. AP reports that twice in Ohio, abortion clinics received calls from women whose doctors also would not treat their ectopic pregnancies. From that report in the AP, an obstetrician delays
inducing a miscarriage until a woman with severe pregnancy complications seems, quote, sick enough. A lupus patient must stop taking medication that controls her illness because it can also cause miscarriages. They also report that Dr. Jessian Munoz, an OBGYN in San Antonio, Texas, who treats high-risk pregnancies, said that medical decisions used to be clear-cut. From the article, now, he said, doctors whose patients develop pregnancy complications are struggling to determine whether a woman is sick enough to justify an abortion. In one case, he said, this is from the article again, we physically watched her get sicker and sicker and sicker until the fetal heartbeat stopped the next day, and then we could intervene. The patient developed complications, required surgery, lost multiple liters of blood, and had to be put on a breathing machine, all because we were essentially 24 hours behind. In a study published this month in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, doctors at 2 Texas hospitals cited the cases of 28 women less than 23 weeks pregnant who were treated for dangerous pregnancies. The doctors noted that all of the women had recommended abortions delayed by 9 days. All of these women had recommended abortions delayed by 9 days because fetal heart activity was detected. Of those, nearly 60% of these folks who had abortions delayed, they developed severe complications, nearly double the number of complications experienced by patients in other states who had immediate therapeutic abortions. Of 8 live births among the Texas cases, 7 died within hours. The 8th, born at 24 weeks, had severe complications, including brain bleeding, a heart defect, lung disease, and intestinal and liver problems. NPR reports that a woman in Texas had her water break at 18 weeks, leaving very little amniotic fluid in the uterus, which is crucial for fetal lung development. From the article, for a fetus at 18 weeks, the chance of survival in that state is almost non-existent. In the state of no amniotic fluid, not in the state of Texas. For a fetus at 18 weeks, the chance of survival in the state of having very little amniotic fluid in the uterus is almost non-existent, according to Peaceman. This is probably about as close to zero as you'll get in medicine. It also carries a risk of infection, which can lead to sepsis, a hysterectomy, and even death. From the article in NPR, in 2012, a woman died in Ireland after her waters broke at 17 weeks, and doctors refused to give her an abortion. The treatment is recommended normally because of the near impossibility of life for the fetus and the danger to the mother. The treatment that is normally recommended is termination of the pregnancy and abortion. When your water breaks at 17, 18 weeks, normally the treatment is an abortion. It's supposed to at least be an option that a woman can take if she wants to. Instead, in Texas, they forced this woman to continue to get, quote, sick enough, like I've been saying, that they could justify to some men in the legislature in Texas that they could terminate the pregnancy. They ended up inducing labor for a stillbirth some weeks later. And of course, we're going to continue to see more of these cases. In other states, they have already, as I understand it, begun convening death panels. People used to be upset about the idea of death panels, but now they're convening them in states to determine if a woman is close enough to dying that a doctor can recommend treatment for an abortion.
It's outlandish. It's outlandish. And you mentioned Ireland, and it's worth noting that occurred in 2012, and since then, Ireland has expanded abortion rights. in that country, a heavily Catholic country. They have gone the opposite direction from the United States.
It's insane. And, of course, we're going to continue to see a lot more of these. And Roe being overturned has laid the foundation, according to Justice Thomas, for the overturning of other rights. Democrats in the U.S. Congress are trying to shore them up while they have power, and Republicans are fighting it. Last week, the U.S. House passed the Respect for Marriage Act, which would seek to codify interracial and same-sex marriage. Every single Republican from Alabama voted against it in the House. They also passed the Right to Contraception Act, which, again, every single Alabama Republican voted against. The right to bodily autonomy, the right to piss in peace, the right to marry whoever the hell you want, the right to contraceptives. All of these rights and freedoms are at risk because people are trying to make you mad about things that have nothing to do with you. But they absolutely affect people on the other side. Women will die. People are going to die. People are going to get beat up. Because people have made folks mad about things that have no effect on them. Your marriage is not going to be affected by an interracial couple being married. Your marriage is not going to be affected by a gay couple being married. Your pregnancy is not going to be affected by people having an abortion. Your pregnancy, your children are not going to be affected by other people having contraceptives. But all of these things are at risk for folks. And for some of you, the mob will eventually come for you too. Some of you are going to be fine, even if all of these things are stripped away, presumably. But there's going to be some folks that are cheering this on, that they're going to turn around, and the mob's going to be looking at them. The mob's going to be saying, "You can't get married." The mob's going to be saying that you need to go to jail. And that's what's happening. This is a very, very serious thing. And the Republicans in D.C., the Republicans across the country have voted against the right to marry who you want and the right to contraceptives. These were not things, and they're going to tell you that these things don't matter on other shows. But if they didn't matter, then just vote to codify it just in case some crazy people come along and try to take it away.
Right? I mean, they said the exact same thing about most of these abortion bans that have been passed in state after state, including Alabama. Right? At the time, we were told, well, you know, there's no need to really freak out about it because Roe v. Wade is still the law and it doesn't really take effect. It's more symbolic. Well, how's their symbolism looking now?
Yeah. It's disgusting. It's really, it's really, really scary. Adam, looks like we've got a caller. See what area code they are, and we can bring them on while I check out the chat. We appreciate everybody watching. From YouTube, Ron says, medical decisions are still clear-cut. Unfortunately now, the best medical decisions often aren't the best legal decisions. And that's exactly right. Because like I've said on the show before, there's not some light bulb that goes off above a woman's head when the pregnancy becomes a risk to her life that's gonna be clear-cut. That's not what happens. These are subjective decisions, and now people in legislatures are trying to step between people and their doctors. It's and then Ron later says some dude who never took college biology overrules your doctor. I mean, it's insane.
All right, we have a caller from the 205 area code.
205 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is Ben. Calling from Hoover. The first-time listener, also first-time caller. I had a question. Kind of a question, also advice. So I work for a home improvement company. I'm not going to say which because I don't want to have retaliation for it.
Right.
But we've been having so many issues with low employment, overwork from management because of the low numbers in our store and everything. And I was talking to a manager about a month ago, and he literally whispered to me across the desk, "Hey, like if we started a union, I can't say I'd support it, but I would definitely support it." And it got me thinking, especially since I just graduated college and everything, as good as the labor market is looking, like, should I take this opportunity, and how would I go about taking the opportunity because it's not like one that like you can just join because it already exists. It's not a matter of getting numbers into one that already exists. It is a matter of how do you start something so that it can exist for people to join. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, that is really, really fantastic. I love to hear that, and hopefully the manager keeps the
that
once
attitude.
once you do start your campaign, I hope that they keep their attitude. But yeah, there are, I don't know what kind of home improvement company that you work for, and you don't have to tell me, but there are several construction unions, there are several trade unions that will organize things like that. Maybe the electrical workers or the iron workers, the laborers union. You could also go with the UE, the United Electrical Workers Union, potentially. And the first things that you're going to do, and you can do these in tandem, is look for the unions that are in your area or unions that would support your campaign, and reach out to a few of these different unions. Reach out to UE, reach out to maybe the IWW, reach out to the electrical workers, the iron workers, and just talk to them and see if they have any interest in supporting your campaign. And also begin having conversations with your coworkers. Obviously not necessarily with your manager, but your other coworkers about work, about the things that they would like to change, and learn more about how, about the things that they want out of their job. And then you can begin educating them about, like, well, we would have more power if we came together collectively and did something, if we did something together. Think about if one of us walked off the job for a day, that's not too big of a deal. It would be a bit of an inconvenience, but if all of us, just took the day off, that's that they're not going to be able to do anything, right? And that's where your power comes from, and that's where the power of collective bargaining and of unions come from. So just kind of start thinking about those conversations, and we have a Unions 101 episode that we did with a union staffer, Connor Lewis, that we did specifically to be a resource for people that are thinking about trying to form a union. So you can find that on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd recommend maybe checking that out and checking out some other resources about how to form a union. But really, that's going to be the big thing is talking to your coworkers about what they'd like to see, educating them about the ways that about the fact that coming together is going to help you, and then reaching out to unions to learn about the dynamics in the unions around you, see who might be the best fit for y'all, and then go from there. And then you're going to do an election, begin bargaining a contract, stuff like that.
if I can
go
interject
ahead.
here, a couple of things I would add to that. Jacob gave you some ideas in terms of unions to reach out to, and certainly that's something that you should do just to see, is there interest or not. We've also seen a wave of workers starting their own unions from scratch. Now that's a whole different, approach, and that's going to come with its own pros and cons, of course. But we saw that with Amazon and with many of the newer organizing drives that are taking place. So that's also an option. But one thing I would just really want to emphasize on these conversations that you're having with these coworkers, these initial conversations don't start with, hey, let's start a union, we're going to go on strike. These are more organizing conversations where you're doing a lot of listening to try to figure out where do they stand on unionization, where do they stand at work, what kind of relationships they have with coworkers and with management, perhaps. I'm going to give you, a couple more practical pieces of advice, which would be, if you don't already have a list of your coworkers, you should be working on that. That's one of the earliest things to do, is to have a list of employees. And then you can have that list as a resource to take notes on as you have these conversations and one-on-ones with other folks, or even small group sessions. Take some notes about what's discussed, where these folks stand. Think of it as kind of like a very early assessment. And the other thing I would add there, so you're doing a lot of listening, you're taking some notes, you have your employee list. I recommend any kind of social outings that are low pressure, that are not necessarily designed to have a union conversation. Go out for coffee, go out for drinks with coworkers. The more that you can build some relationships and figure people out, I think that really goes a long way. And of course, these early conversations and these early actions you're taking are best done on the down low. You don't want to advertise too widely, because even though you had someone from management indicate that they probably think it's a good idea for y'all to organize, and they wouldn't stand in your way, but that's just one manager. Right. And rest assured, most of them won't
and that
feel
was
that
store
way.
management, not corporate management.
Right. Yeah. So those are some things just to think about. But I think no matter where it goes, you can have conversations with coworkers. You can learn more about what supports are available, and build those relationships. That's something that I think is possible for everyone.
Yeah.
Whether or not it results in a union election or not, and I think it's very important. But I think the fact that you're interested and you're asking these questions is already off to a great start.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, one of the things that is really that's really important is that you building these relationships is really important. You want to have credibility. You have to have credibility in your workplace to be any sort of effective advocate for unionism. If you go up to your coworkers and you've got a reputation for being lazy, you've got a reputation for slacking off, coming in an hour late, not doing your work, people having to pick up the slack for you, they're just going to think that you're in this for like super selfish reasons, like you just don't want to work, you're a troublemaker, you're like, and not the good kind, right? Like you're just lazy. And really the best organizer is going to be like the best employee a lot of times, and the best employee according to the other coworkers. It's not necessarily by the metrics of like who management thinks is the best worker, but who do your coworkers respect the most? Who do they trust? Who do they go to when they've got a problem? Who do they go to with questions when a problem needs solving? You want to be that person, or you want to have that person on your side.
Right. I think that's exactly right, and that's the beginnings of your organizing committee right there is those kinds of folks folks that have trust among the staff and folks that you can trust, frankly. And I think it's Jacob's advice there is spot on, not just to build trust for yourself amongst your staff, but also to avoid painting a bullseye on your back.
Right.
Because obviously that's something that if things develop and this becomes a true organizing campaign, the bullseyes will come out, possibly. Not always, but certainly likely. And so you don't want to do anything, especially early on, that may make it easier for management. So yeah, don't show up late. Just pick your battles wisely. Pick your battles wisely, especially early on, as you're still trying to figure out the landscape, basically. But those are some things that, off the top of our heads, and I think, the Unions 101 video would also be a great thing to look at. And there are some fantastic resources out there for just this kind of scenario. And UE, United Electrical, they have fantastic information out there on their website, regardless of, whether that's a union that's, your choice or even an option. The resources they have available online would definitely be helpful for you. And also want to plug Labor Notes as another resource. There's information online that you can access that goes through, how do I have that one-on-one organizing conversation? What does that look like? And more into like the nuts and bolts of what this would look like in a practical setting. And they actually have trainings online this month, some live trainings that may be of interest to you. So hopefully
check those out.
Hopefully, this gave you some things to chew on for this question, and I really, really appreciate you calling.
Yep.
The biggest thing I'm surprised about was, it was something you mentioned early on, that if you're in one kind of industry but you want to unionize or you're dealing with a unionizing drive, other unions that are not in that industry are willing to help out.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing that surprised me.
Yeah, a lot of unions are, to a certain extent, like a general union. So the Machinists Union, I'm pretty familiar with. The co-founder of this program is a Machinists Union member. They've got people that are members of the Machinists Union that have unions in their workplace in the healthcare sector, in education, and in other places. I know that the IBEW organized a coffee shop in Wisconsin a while back. So there are definitely unions that'll go outside of maybe their main industry. It's definitely preferable to have a union that is the closest to your industry, just because they're going to know it the best. Organizing in the healthcare sector with the Machinists Union, maybe they're not going to have as much resources devoted to it as maybe National Nurses United, but it's an option, and you want to know, you want to figure out the best way to, or the best union for you, the best fit.
It's just finding that best fit, and maybe, who's available, who has resources locally that they could devote, who's interested. So, we don't want to give the impression that, like, every union from every industry is just going to be jumping up for joy, beating down your door to start this campaign. I think most folks don't necessarily get that experience. But you'd be surprised at what unions would take an interest, even if it doesn't necessarily fit the name or the reputation. UAW representing education workers, for example, and the list goes on and on. So it's definitely a possibility, and it's also good to start having those conversations with them, because as your organizing develops, once this hopefully becomes an organizing committee, you're going to want some partners in the community who can provide solidarity, who could provide wisdom and advice, because they've been there and done that. And you never know what kind of support you may need as things develop when it comes to folks showing up
And
to
even
support a picket, you know?
That's exactly right. You know, even unions that aren't going to necessarily be the union you organize with will still absolutely help you. Just last weekend, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, there were like half a dozen unions that showed up to support Starbucks workers in Scottsboro who were fired. We had steel workers there. We had machinists there. We had federal employees. We had electrical workers. All sorts of folks, communication workers came out, NASA workers that are unionized with IFPTE. So, you know, even if they're not going to be the union that you unionize with, ultimately, they will be there, or a lot of them will be there to help you in whatever way that they can. Maybe donate to a strike fund, something like that.
Right.
Gotcha. Well, I've been taking notes during this whole time. Thanks for all the advice. I love the show. I'm so excited that someone else in Alabama is doing this besides me, or is interested in this sort of thing besides me.
There's more of us than we realize.
Very nice.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much, and I think that we should have your number from our system, and if it's all right, we might follow up with you.
Sure. I don't know. Like, this is the first. I don't know how fast this can develop, but like.
But just that way you've got our contact information.
Yeah.
We're available if you need.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, brother. Thanks for the call. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And look forward to hearing more from you.
Bye bye.
All right, folks. Really exciting call. So we're gonna see another union forming in Hoover here in next week.
I feel good. I mean, I love
filing.
I love that folks are interested.
Yeah.
And those are the questions that we all have to be asking. How do we do this? Where do we start? And we all have to start somewhere. So that's great. And, you know,
Absolutely.
I love Ben's comment that he was just glad there's someone else out there in Alabama. And that's part of why we do this show, because there's a lot more folks out there like us who are interested in politics and power for and by the working class. There's a lot more of us out here than we realize.
Yeah. We're going to head to a break. On the other side, we are going to be talking to Matthew Clark, contributor to Koch-funded Flat Earth Military Coup Crypto Bro Boosting 1819 News about the Attorney General of the state of Alabama. Stay tuned. It's going to be fun.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
8th Street Community is hiring. 305 8th Street is looking for house managers to provide a safe, healthy, and loving environment to our residents by cooking, cleaning, and caring for their everyday needs. First, second, and third shifts available. Starting rate $12.50 per hour. PTO and benefits available. Maybe you can be our next house manager and make a big difference. Send resume to KELSEY at 305-8thstreet.org or 305-8thstreet.org/join-our-family. An equal opportunity employer.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, and my co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Call or text the show anytime, even if we're not on the air. Leave us a voicemail, send us a text.
That's right.
We might read it on the next program. So, Matthew Clark is the president of the Alabama Center for Law and Liberty, which is the nonprofit litigation arm of the Alabama Policy Institute. Those folks are everywhere, and a contributor for 1819 News, which is also a subsidiary of the Alabama Policy Institute. Matt, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Lots of folks aren't willing to, have a conversation with people that they might disagree with, so I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Jacob. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you. So, you first came on my radar when you wrote an op-ed about Danny Carr. You were lamenting his proclamation that he's not going to be prosecuting abortions. Now, I'm not interested right now in a debate on abortion. I think both of our positions are pretty clear, and people can look that up. But in your op-ed, you mentioned something. You mentioned some criteria for prosecutorial discretion, and I was interested if you could elaborate on that for me. From your article, you said, first, if the law is unclear, the prosecutor necessarily has to use his discretion on how to proceed, and a prosecutor can decline to prosecute when doing so would be fundamentally unjust. So those are your two criteria that you had, if it's unclear or if it's unjust. Is that in the Alabama Code somewhere?
No, not as far as I know. However, I think it comes from just the nature of the beast. So I worked for about 4 years on the Alabama Supreme Court as a staff attorney before I got out into private practice. And one thing that was just shocking to me has been, look, I'm all about law and order. And I think, regardless of where we fall on the political spectrum, we can all agree that we need some level of law enforcement in order to survive as a society. However, the way that things work nowadays, I think we have an over-criminalization of a lot of stuff. If one person commits one offense, it can fall into maybe about 3 or 4 different categories of crimes because, we've passed so many laws. And so it's not really 100% clear which one you ought to pick. And so in cases like that, prosecutors, they've traditionally enjoyed some level of discretion, saying, okay, Option A would get us the longest prison sentence. It's kind of a stretch, but if we really want to be hard on this guy, we can go for that. Option 2, the penalty fits the crime a little better. We got a pretty good shot of landing that. Option 3 might go a little bit easy on the guy. Which one do we want to pick? That's the kind of discretion that prosecutors across states, whether it's in Alabama or elsewhere, have traditionally enjoyed. And then second, our legislature doesn't always do a very good job of making clear what the offense is. It's no secret that sometimes legislators can pass laws that are either poorly written or things like that, just in order to score political points with their constituency. And then when they find out the law is actually enforced, they get shocked. So in cases like that, where it's not that it's not necessarily that they passed a law that they're surprised that would be actually enforced, but a law that is so badly written that it's hard to figure out what the law is, what the offense is, how do you prove it, things like that. In cases like that, prosecutors necessarily have to figure out, how do I make sense out of this mess? And so in a lot of cases like that, there's a lot of gray that they're dealing with, and they can decide how to proceed. So I think in cases like that, both where the law presents you with a lot of options or where it's very unclear, those are where prosecutorial discretion really come into play. I think it's a completely different matter when the law is black and white and you just don't like it. But in the cases I mentioned before, though, I think prosecutors have to use discretion in order to do their job.
But that's not like, I looked for it. I'm not gonna pretend that I spent hours and hours and hours looking for any, but I couldn't find any guidance at all, and I found multiple things that said that more or less, or actually in actuality, district attorneys, attorney generals have unilateral discretion about what they do and don't prosecute and how they prosecute it and what they try to get for it, and that there's nothing in the Alabama. I looked in the Alabama Rules of Professional Conduct on judicial.alabama.gov, special responsibilities of prosecutor. Didn't find anything about prosecutorial discretion. I mean, I can't find any guidance at all saying that they have to enforce every single law.
Sure. So if you're looking for like a code or something like that lays out, here's when you enforce the law, here's when you don't enforce the law, you're not going to find it. Now, in the Alabama Code, for district attorneys, it does say that they can be impeached, and one of the explicit grounds for impeachment is willful dereliction of duty. So we do have kind of a gray area here. You're not going to find like a comprehensive code saying, in classes A, B, and C, of crimes, you have some discretion there, but in D, E, and F, you don't. But what the Alabama Code does say is it can rise to the level of willful dereliction of duty, where you are not enjoying a reasonable level of discretion, but you are just absolutely declining to do your job. And in cases like that, the Alabama Attorney General has a duty to initiate impeachment proceedings against district attorneys that don't do that. That's under Title 36 of the Alabama Code. I can get you specific code sections if you'd like to know.
Sure.
But
yeah, so I think I think that's interesting, and so and so basically there's an impeachment process. If people in the government maybe think that there's a dereliction of duty, quote unquote, but there's no real guidance, and so it's basically like are the people in power happy with the way that you're enforcing the law? And I guess my issue with the idea that one district attorney is not going to enforce one law is that district attorneys across the state of Alabama, including the attorney general, it seems to me, don't enforce laws all the time. It's all and specifically with regards to wage theft, which is you could classify that as just any other type of theft. It's most of the time it's not. Most of the time, wage theft is prosecuted civilly and is taken care of by the Department of Labor. But I don't see any reason why a district attorney, and in fact, district attorneys across the country are beginning to. There are some that are beginning to have wage theft and worker protection divisions that are prosecuting criminally, that are moving forward with criminal prosecutions, when bosses are stealing from workers. But that's something I don't think even the most, I don't even know if we have really a left-wing district attorney in the state of Alabama. But, to the extent that we do, I'm not aware of any district attorney that's prosecuting wage theft, which is something that multiple studies have shown is responsible for more theft than all goods stolen in all other property crime. This is something that is a widespread issue: overtime violations, people not getting paid for what they worked, people being told to clock out early, not getting paid for the last hour of their shift, things like this. This is super widespread, and nobody across the state of Alabama cares about it. And so when I hear people take issue with one district attorney not prosecuting one law, it makes me question a bit their sincerity, if that makes sense, to a neutral law and order idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, because you have to be consistent. Because if the rule is that prosecutors have to enforce the law, then it really comes down to, well, what do you do with laws that you don't like? You can't be selective. You either got to enforce them or you need to not. But you have to be consistent. So I see where you're coming from. I have to confess, I haven't looked into the wage theft issue, so I'd have to look into that a little bit more before I could comment intelligently. Based on what you're telling me, it does sound to me like, generally speaking, this is more of a civil matter. Now, again, I haven't looked up the statutes, so I can't comment on that. So if it's civil, the courts are open and you can fight it out there. But if it is criminal, and if the DAs are getting complaints and they're not going after it, then yeah, I think they have some explaining to do for why not. Now, what I will tell you, in my experience dealing with DAs in Alabama, I think I sound weird to a lot of my conservative friends saying this, but I think generally speaking, I think Alabama DAs have a problem with overkill, especially in those scenarios where there are multiple laws that address an offense. And, a lot of the times they tend to go for enforcing the hardest rule possible. For instance, a couple of years ago, I was representing a client who got caught stealing a nail gun from Lowe's. That was wrong. That was theft. He deserved to be punished for that. But because of how the prosecutor misread the statute, he prosecuted him for first-degree robbery, which is the kind of robbery that happens when you pull a gun on somebody when you're trying to, get away with it. And that did not happen in this case. And because of Alabama's habitual felony offender law, that was his third strike for property crimes, and he got a life sentence because of that. A life sentence for stealing a nail gun. Yeah, from Lowe's. So that, that's the kind of stuff that I've seen over my career where, I have to speak up sometimes and tell some of our, conservative district attorneys saying, look, I'm about law and order, but you got to keep in mind, this is about law and justice. Justice is getting a proportional penalty for what you did. Sending a man to prison for stealing a nail gun, that's just insanity. So anyway, right. Jacob, in my experience, I've seen very little of Alabama prosecutors declining to prosecute crimes. If anything, I think they go for the jugular a lot.
Yeah, so I can kind of explain the wage theft issue is traditionally, wage theft is theft. You could just prosecute it as theft, right? There's no reason you say you owe this person based on the terms of his employment a certain amount of money and he doesn't get it. That's theft. We could just literally prosecute that as theft. Most of the time it is taken care of civilly, which conveniently for bosses comes with, no criminal penalties. And when, like you said, somebody steals a nail gun, which is much less than bosses steal from workers in the form of wage theft, he potentially gets a life sentence, where bosses might have to pay back wages. Might is the operative word there. And the civil penalties, most of the times, as I'm sure you can imagine, most of the time, people do not report the theft, but sometimes they don't even know that they're being stolen from. Sometimes they know very well that they're being stolen from, but they fear retaliation for reporting it. And so you can imagine that these reports are few and far between. And a lot of times, actually, the civil violations, we just had one come out of the Department of Labor with Chipotle in Alabama, where workers were awarded like $100,000 in overtime violations. But that didn't come from it. That came from somebody after they left, right? And so there would have been, if that one person hadn't come forward and said, look at this, and the DOL hadn't done that investigation, they would still be doing that and nobody would know except the workers, maybe, and so this wage theft, worker protections, it seems to me, there has to be a certain amount of proactive, maybe we could say broken windows policing kind of thing, because a lot of times workers are not going to do this, but we know for a fact that it happens. We know for a fact that workers are stolen from, and we have every reason to believe, because of the studies that have been done, that bosses steal more from workers in wage theft and overtime violations than all other property crime combined. Like, we have every reason to believe that, but very, very, very few district attorneys have any proactive resources on this. I mean, is it tracking that workers wouldn't come forward with this kind of stuff, and that you would need some sort of proactive stuff going on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. This is fascinating again, because this is kind of the first time I'm hearing of this stuff. I do think, generally speaking, workers could be afraid to come forward because, in a different context. I remember back in law school, one of my old professors told me that if you ever have like a complaint against a judge, it's like hunting a bear. Bring a big gun and make sure you only have to shoot once. So in the same way here, if there is wage theft going on, I think workers are probably thinking along the lines of, okay, if I'm going to speak up, I better make sure I get it the first time, because if I don't, all I'm going to do is tick off my boss, and then I could get fired or something along those lines. So I think so the concept certainly makes sense. Yeah, I'd be interested to explore what options DAs have, especially when it comes to the issue of theft. This is one area where civil law and criminal law overlap a lot, and so a lot of the times people do have discretion on asking, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to press criminal charges, or do you want to get your money back? I think in cases involving theft, like my clients, I think a lot of the times the primary remedy to pursue is restitution. Not only get the victim their money back, but also slap the violator with a heavier fine. So you got a mix of punishment and restitution in there. But in cases where, let's say, there's absolutely systemic theft or something like that, I think maybe that's a case where criminal penalties ought to be looked at, because at that point the goal is deterrence. It's like we can either try to get everybody their money back one at a time, which we ought to pursue, or we can try to hit you hard enough to where it stops theft, and it stops it sends a message to everybody else watching that this is going to go badly if you try to intentionally steal from your employees. So it's interesting. It's kind of a classic lawyer answer. I guess it depends. What do you want? Do you want to get the victims their restitution back, or do you want to stop the practice? So I think that's how you look at it.
I'm sorry, Adam.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in here. Matt, I think something that we would definitely agree with is that we do have many overly zealous prosecutors and district attorneys, and I think what you said, that Alabamians are often over-criminalized, I think that's absolutely true. I think the distinguishing factor there, of course, is who, which Alabamians.
Right.
And I liked your example about a lawyer having to go after a judge and comparing that to hunting a bear. That's good. And I think that actually there's a lot of parallel there because of the power imbalance that's speaking to. And I think that's what we see in our justice system, is that working class folks, particularly people of color, poor folks, are dealing with such a power imbalance in the system, and working class folks are over criminalized when it comes to your traditional crimes that you might name, whereas the issues that Jacob's speaking to in terms of wage theft and other abuses by companies, by bosses, are often under criminalized and under prosecuted, under investigated. And I think the parallel is very clear there, in that as a worker trying to take on your boss or your company, you know, it would be like taking on a bear. And I think even more so in the context of a country like the United States and a state like Alabama, where it's pretty clear the justice system is tilted in the favor of employers and companies as opposed to workers and ordinary citizens. So I'll let y'all get back to your discussion. I know, Jacob, you wanted to ask about Steve Marshall. But I just wanted to kind of share that, you know, I think there's some common ground that we have, and maybe kind of expand on our perspective and where we're coming from.
Maybe we can keep up the conversation after the show and have you back on sometime. But he mentioned other worker abuses, and that's the next thing that I wanted to ask you about. You know, you're aware of the situation with child labor at the Montgomery Hyundai plant, right?
Well, believe it or not, when you guys reached out to me and asked me to look into that, I'm trying to get my timeline straight. I think I was out of town for work, then I had COVID, then got out of town with my family for vacation.
That Whitney didn't tell me that you had COVID. I'm glad to see you're feeling better, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, I haven't really had time to look into that. I have seen some allegations that they've been using child, was it like 12 to 15-year-olds or something like that?
Yes. Yeah. So back in February, the police department in Enterprise notified the Alabama Attorney General's office that that this had been going on, that there are 12-year-olds working there, and that came about because this 13-year-old went to Atlanta with a coworker to look for more work, but her parents didn't know that she did that, and so she filed a missing child report or whatever, and they found them, and the cops were like, "Why do y'all know each other? Why are y'all here?" And they said that we work together, and that's how they found out, and that's how the Reuters people got a hold of it. And when the Reuters people went into talked to more people, they said they talked to workers who there were dozens of children, like preteen, obviously looking people, on this factory floor that has had, over the past 10 years, $50,000 in fines from OSHA. And I think you being a lawyer, you know that OSHA does not do that very often. And they had a fine as recently as last year, violations including amputation hazards, crushing hazards, and all of this stuff. And the Attorney General's office was notified of this in February. And they haven't done anything about it. And when this report came out, the Alabama Department of Labor said that, we opened an investigation into it, but they told the press that nobody had told them about this before. Nobody had, so the Attorney General has known about this since February, and he did not, even if, I think people should go to jail. Right, I think that there are people in the management at this Hyundai plant who should go to jail. But at the very least, there should be some sort of civil penalties, which would be what the Alabama Department of Labor would do. And he didn't even do that. He didn't even pursue that. Didn't even hand it off to the Alabama Department of Labor. He sat on it for 5 months, and now we're going on 6 months. And he hasn't even so much released a statement about it. He hasn't even tweeted about it, but he's had the time to tweet out forms about people who get their feelings hurt on Twitter. You know, you can let the Alabama Attorney General know. And, look, I've said on the show, and you don't watch the show, and that, I understand that, but I understand critiques about social media that come from conservatives. But, there are children in your state working in manufacturing facilities with amputation hazards. We need to have some sort of priorities here. And he hasn't even said anything about it. And this is incredibly, incredibly frustrating for me, because 82 minutes after the Roe decision came out, 82 minutes, didn't even take him 2 hours, he's already filing stuff, right? And so it seems to me that there's no concern for justice. There's no concern for protecting children, right? It's just about what's going to play to the base. And so So then again, you wrote an article praising him for what he did about Roe, and there's nothing. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody in conservative media, nobody on the radio, there's nothing about it with respect to the Attorney General letting these people off the hook.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think one thing we have to consider is that the Alabama Attorney General's office could be investigating this right now, and their standard procedure when they're still investigating is not to comment to the public before they formed a conclusion. So that has frustrated me at times, because even when I was reaching out to him about Danny Carr not enforcing, saying that he wasn't going to enforce Alabama's abortion law in Jefferson County, the initial response I got, and I used to be fairly close to Steve Marshall. I used to go to church with him and sit next to him every Sunday. But the response I got back from him was, "Thank you for reaching out. We're looking into it." And that's all I got. I'm thinking, really? Come on. I've been in a lot of battles with you, been on the same side, and this is all I'm getting. But at the end of the day, law enforcement has to be careful about what they tell the press before they've decided whether they're going to take action or not. So he has been silent, but it could be that they are looking into this and they're just not telling the public what they're preparing to do yet. As far as the abortion matter goes, one thing we got to keep in mind too is that there had been a case going on since I believe it was 2019. So by that point, the AG's office had already been in that fight for about 3 years. Federal district judges stepped in and told him, "Okay, you can't enforce this law until the Supreme Court overrules Roe." But the day that the court overruled Roe, he stepped in and said, "Okay, Roe's gone. I don't think there's any basis for not enforcing this law anymore. So go ahead and lift your injunction." And that was pretty easy to do. I think that whole motion was like, 2 pages long. It was pretty standard. So I think that's part of why the abortion case was different. And then in addition, look, we may disagree on this. And I know you said you weren't necessarily looking to have a debate, but if we're talking about protecting children, if unborn children are people, then, stepping in and, at your first chance and, trying to stop them from getting killed, I think does demonstrate a willingness to protect children rather than, just playing to the base. But I do agree with you that if there is child labor going on in the Hyundai plant, and if there are amputation hazards and stuff like that, then yeah, we ought to show the same concern for them. And I hope he's doing that behind the scenes. So I would encourage you, stay on this story, keep it alive in the press, because if this is going on, then I would hope that the AG's office or the Alabama Department of Labor or the local district attorney, keep pressing him and say, "Okay, you got to make a decision. Are you going to do something about this? Or after a reasonable investigation, have you found that these allegations are not true? If you found that they're not true and you can explain why, okay, maybe we can deal with that. But,
Right.
just don't sit on it."
From the Reuters report, Mike Lewis, a spokesperson at the Alabama Attorney General's office, declined to comment. It's not even like there's an investigation, we're looking into it. There's just no comment. There's nothing. There's nothing from them. And so that's and the Alabama Department of Labor did say that we were not informed of this. We were not informed of this.
So those don't bode well.
Yeah, they don't bode well. So all right. Well, I appreciate your concern for that, and I hope that maybe we can continue the conversation, and maybe we can write a joint letter to the Alabama Attorney General about
Hey,
this.
that would be some bipartisan spirit right there.
That would be something, yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt, I do appreciate the time. I do want to ask, as we're letting you go, is it like a little bit embarrassing that 1819 News was like gave such a flattering interview to a flat earther running for governor, that there's been a couple of op-eds in a row about like litter boxes in schools, which is something that's not happening? The boosting that crypto scam right before the crash, like is that were you even aware of those things? Is that like a little bit embarrassing to be associated with those folks? I'm curious about that.
Well, I know about their interview with Dean Odell. I haven't heard about the other things, but I think generally speaking, 1819 does good work. And as far as Dean Odell goes, I mean, look, I disagree with the flat earther thing. I mean, I just I don't see how you can deal with that. But on the other hand, it's like in politics, everybody running for office is imperfect in some way. And so, especially if somebody comes out and says something that, makes you, squint your eyes, tilt your head and go, really? This is what you're going for? The question becomes, what's the remedy? Do we cancel that person because, they've said something that, appears to us to be so, just off the wall, and just write off everything else that they say? Or do we sit down with them and say, okay, that was a little bit weird, but, we believe you've had some good things to say on other issues, and we're going to give you a fair shake to explain your position. So I think on Dean Odle in particular, I'm grateful that they gave him an opportunity to get his positions out there instead of just hearing, all right, I've got this one belief that, I absolutely can't, I absolutely can't agree with. But, I'm proud of them.
I think it would have been helpful for the audience if that's the only place that, because there may be people that's the only thing that they heard about him. I would imagine it would have been helpful for them to know that he supports a military coup and that he believes the earth is flat. Those would be things that I would want to know if I would at least want it mentioned, I think. But Matt Clark, I do appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Matt Clark, Alabama Center for Law and Liberty, everybody. We appreciate his time. Yeah. We're going to take a break, but don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. We're going to talk to y'all about what's happening with the UMWA strike on the other side.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383
888-885-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, give us a call or text us. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We have one caller on the line, but we are going to take it in overtime if you want to stay on the line, or if you would just rather get off and call back in, because we want to make sure that we get to this UMWA story before we get off of the radio. So up to you, caller, but we're not going to be able to take it for about 13 minutes. I do have to read this ad really quick from our brothers and sisters in the IUPAT, International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. I'm gonna get it this afternoon. I'm gonna record it this afternoon. But in the meantime, are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, IUPAT. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glaziers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an apprenticeship, with an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary, with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you would like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142. For more information, come build a better future with us and join IUPAT today. So, folks, let's get to this. Crazy, crazy stuff. Truly unhinged. Bonkers, as some people would say. I mean, really just genuinely unhinged updates on the Warrior Met strike for you this morning. So, Warrior Met is trying to get the miners to pay them $13.3 million in strike costs. Yes.
Just totally outrageous.
You heard that right. $13.3 million in strike costs. Back in June, 2 months ago, the union entered a settlement with the company for, quote, unlawful strike activity in order to save striking members and families from days of hostile questioning by company lawyers, which is reasonable enough, right? I mean, these people have been on strike, they've got enough going on, and being harangued by company lawyers, that's a lot. That's a lot to ask of anybody. And they did this, though. They did this on an estimate of the settlement being $400,000. $400,000 from the NLRB, right? Which is 33 times less. It is 1/33 of what the company is coming back with right now. So now they're asking for more. Warrior Met is. Even, get this, reimbursements from costs incurred before the strike. How can it be reimbursements for unlawful strike activity if it happened before the strike even began?
Right, that's not strike activity.
Definitionally.
From their statement, the UMWA International President Cecil E. Roberts said there are charges for security, cameras, capital expenditures, buses for transporting scabs across picket lines, and the cost of lost production. How is unlawful, even if we grant that some union members or some union officers did some unlawful strike activity, let's just grant that. How is paying for buses a reimbursement for that? How is paying for lost production a reimbursement for that? Lost production. That's the whole damn point of a strike, is that you don't have as much production. The union they're obviously going to be fighting this request from the company. From their press release yesterday, quote, "I want to be clear. Warrior Met Coal instigated this strike and has brutally extended it through its sustained unwillingness to reach a fair and reasonable agreement at the bargaining table. We have no intention of paying its costs for doing so. The right to strike in America must be preserved. We will fight this at every level, in every court. We will spend every penny of our resources rather than give in to something like this from the NLRB, Warrior Met, or any other entity." And that's absolutely the correct position. That's
I wouldn't pay him
necessary.
13 cents, much less $13 million.
$13 million. That's insane.
It is. It's a very dangerous precedent should it actually go through. But just the gall.
The gall to even ask for
Warrior
lost
Met
production.
To ask for that is just more evidence of what a bad faith actor they are. Just really the definition.
Totally.
I mean, if you want to find like the stereotype of a 19th century Gilded Age corporation that is just beyond the pale in terms of greed, Warrior Met Coal is upholding that legacy.
The Teamsters came out with a statement yesterday as well. Quote, "The Teamsters proudly stand with our brothers and sisters of the United Mine Workers of America to combat this assault on American workers by the National Labor Relations Board," said Teamsters General President Sean M. O'Brien. "Are we simply going to strip hard-working Americans of their ability to organize and of their freedom to strike corrupt employers? At what point is the federal government going to intervene to actually protect working people?"
Right.
We're going to keep you updated on the proceedings here. Obviously, the next step is that the NLRB will take the union's response to this basically opening volley from Warrior Met, and then Region 10 will complete their own assessment of the costs. And then, if an agreement is not reached, they'll go before an administrative law judge, and their opinion could be appealed before the General Counsel of the NLRB, and then they could appeal that to District Court, a Federal Court of Appeals or something. The NLRB press secretary yesterday told me that if there's not an agreement with the region's ultimate decisions, which will come after the union responds, the region will commence a proceeding before an administrative law judge where the parties can present arguments and evidence about what each considers to be appropriate damages. So, we'll see what Region 10 comes out with. My understanding is that the UMWA what the UMWA is responding to, what they've been responding to in the last week, is not actually a ruling or a decision or anything from the NLRB, but more like letting them know what Warrior Met's saying that their bill is and asking for a response. So we'll see if Region 10's assessment is even remotely close to what Warrior Met is asking for.
Surely not.
It will be an attack on working people in the state of Alabama, an attack on working people all across the country, and an attack on working people and their freedoms, their ability to organize, freely associate and strike and withhold their labor. It'll be a really, really terrible decision. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll definitely keep you updated.
Let's just hope that this is Warrior Met's wish list and that the NLRB sees through this.
Yeah.
And, it is sent back and there's a reasonable settlement entered into here and not anything so egregious as this, not just in the cost, but in the very principles of charging for lost production. busing scabs and on and on. The things that they asked for,
yeah,
just truly wild.
Unhinged.
Yes, I mean, it's honestly to me, if you're the NLRB, you ought to laugh them out of the room for being so completely ridiculous and bad faith.
Right. It's really, really wild. So we are going to wrap up here on the radio with our last 4 or 5 minutes. We're going to get to some other stuff in overtime that we weren't able to get to during the main show. But
we have really, some good stuff lined up in overtime today, that's for sure.
Yeah, some really good stuff. So I do want to mention really quick, though, that, of course, our hearts go out to the folks suffering in Kentucky. 37 Kentuckians have died because of the floods over there. And more have been hurt. Thousands are now left without homes. And they aren't even out of the woods yet. They're staring down another round of heavy rain before they even have a chance to dry off. It's just a horrible situation over there. But working folks are helping each other out. The Secretary-Treasurer of the Kentucky AFL-CIO said that they're going to be sending out folks to fulfill needs across the state, like plumbing and electrical work. They're also going to be using some funds left over from the money collected last year in the aftermath of tornadoes in eastern Kentucky. And the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union in Kentucky had several members lose a lot during the flood, and they're collecting the RWDSU donations for their members. Those checks can be sent to RWDSU Kentucky Flood Relief Fund, courtesy of RWDSU. The address is 377th Avenue in New York, New York.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a couple other organizations or funds that you could be supporting if you were so inclined, folks that are doing good work. A couple of independent Southern media outlets, Southerly and Scalawag, they have both been doing some really great coverage and are providing resource pages, so you can learn more about what's happening, but also these are great resources to send to people if you have any loved ones up that way. And a few organizations, East Kentucky Mutual Aid, Eastern Kentucky Flood Relief Fund, which I saw the Sierra Club was boosting, and Queer Kentucky, based out of Louisville, has been doing supply drives, and Apple Shop, APPALSHOP, Apple Shop. They've been doing some great work as well. So just wanted to mention those. Whatever you can do to support our sisters and brothers up there.
Just a couple reminders as we're getting off the radio. The Free Automotive Repair and Service Project, hosted by the North Alabama School for Organizers, is going to be on August 14th from 9 to 3 at Knights Village in Huntsville. There's a new album out from Lee Baines and the Glory Fires. The album is called Old Time Folks. You can get it through Don Giovanni Records. Tuesday, August 9th, Alabama Rise is hosting the last of their series of online town halls. This one titled Making the Vision a Reality, The Path Forward. Join online at 6 p.m. Monday, August 8th, there is a Huntsville Municipal Candidate Forum at 7 p.m. The event will be held at the Calvary Hills Community Theater and on Facebook Live. You can join to hear candidates from District 2 and District 4. Reminder that Tuesday, August 23rd is the local election in Huntsville. Put that on your calendar. Huntsville City Council and Board of Education seats for District 2, 3, and 4. Labor Notes has a series of online trainings. LaborNotes.org. Energy Alabama is holding a Huntsville meetup on September 15th. Find us online where we're going to be talking about some propaganda from the New York Times, talking Christianity and labor with Matt Bernico from the Magnificast, and lots more. So make sure you find us online. We are on YouTube and Facebook, continuing to stream right now at The Valley Labor Report. And you can give us a call if you want to join the show during overtime. It's still 844-899-TVLR. There's 844-899-8857. All power to the workers. All right. We're off the radio. Right?
I do believe so.
Got rid of those folks on the radio. Howdy, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with us. We do have a great overtime lined up for you today. We got a wild clip wild clip from the New York Times about how you can stop inflation. We're going to be talking to Matt Bernico from the Magnificast, maybe a couple of other things. Like I said, you can still call in, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. We're going to take a short break, and we will be right back.
On prices would be...
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, welcome back. You're still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio program. And we are now in overtime. We are now in overtime, which is the second half of the program. Online only. Got rid of those folks on the radio. Let's take a look at some chat. We really appreciate the folks in the chat in Facebook and on YouTube. During our conversation with Matthew Clark, Clarence Barr said, has the state DA, I think you meant Attorney General, yet said anything about the Hyundai plant and child labor? And no, nothing. I mean, like, that's Looney Tunes. And then Strom said, in response to Matt saying something about, if there are people filing complaints or something and DAs aren't doing anything about it, well, then that's an issue. He says, you can just file a suit just like that. It's so easy, with the obvious implication that it's not. He says there's no guarantee that a lawyer will take your case on a contingency basis. And that's absolutely right. Like, working people don't have the money to just hire lawyers.
Right. Finding the time and the money and the lawyer.
Totally.
And just to go through an exercise in a rigged system, you know, that's a lot to ask. And the chance of success is way too low.
Jose says, I just started reading about the NLRB decision about the United Mine Workers of America. And yeah, it's definitely, my understanding
concerning.
is that it's not a decision yet, but it is very concerning. And if they do side with the company, it'd be terrible.
I mean, I think we should see this as a telegraph of what other corporations are going to do. Warrior Met will not be the last company to pursue this kind of request.
Right.
I mean, I think we're going to see a trend, unfortunately, and so that's why the decision, when it comes, will be so important.
Clarence says, why and what was keeping the DA or State Department of Labor from prosecuting or investigating the Hyundai plant? Does someone at the plant have an in with the government? Because this is insane. And yeah,
Good questions.
I mean, we paid them a lot of money to come here.
Good questions.
Ron says they had no idea the children were underage. They just thought they were short adults with delayed development. That's probably, they would say something like that.
Yeah, we'll probably see that in a court filing one day.
Yeah. In response to, this was pretty funny. In response to Matt saying that flat earthers are imperfect, Strom says, like, imperfect in all caps, and Jeb says, wow, in the chat. That was, that's accurate. It's an accurate way to describe his views on the shape of the earth. They're imperfect.
It's one thing to, 1819 clearly was very flattering and positive in their overall tone and approach towards that guy.
Yeah, I mean,
who was a total nut.
I'm all for like letting people talk, but you gotta
We've had people say stupid shit on our show.
You gotta let your audience know the crazy things that they're about. You can't just have a flat earther pro-military coup. I mean, the flat earth is just kind of like a silly thing, but like pro-military coup, like wants to execute Joe Biden, like your audience needs to know that. And maybe their audience would think that was a good thing, I don't know, but they need to know that. It's serious stuff. Clarence says, remedies for lost production is like claiming I deserve a bailout because I ran the company into the ground. It's the company's own fault for that loss, obviously. Ron says, does the NLRB police Warrior Met as aggressively as they police the UMWA? Presumably not, but the NLRB press secretary did say that there are charges being that are working their way through the system against Warrior Met as well that presumably we might like a little bit better. So, I don't know. We'll see about that. William Pina says, good morning, comrades. Good morning, William. Mr. Anderson says, water levels in the West are getting really low. And yeah, that's some crazy stuff. I just saw that on Means TV yesterday. Insane. Have you seen that, Adam?
Yeah, I saw Means Morning News, actually. Yeah, same thing.
Crazy.
It's very concerning. Certainly would not want to live out west right now, as tough as the South is, and a myriad of ways. I don't know. I would hesitate to even want to buy a house or move out in the West because places like Nevada, Arizona are becoming increasingly hostile to life.
Yeah. William says, looks like we're back on the back on the UMWA story. I understand that the miners union agreed to pay a smaller percentage of damages to Warrior Matt. That's crazy. Yeah, 33 times less. They entered the settlement. They signed the settlement with the understanding that it would be about $400,000. Jose says, I can see UPS, Amazon, and Starbucks and all these corporations taking notes. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, we see what Starbucks is doing right now, and of course we've seen what Amazon's been doing. I think we're going to see escalating actions from the bosses.
Mel Sutton says, how about the $45 million hit the right-wing hate conspiracy theory Alex Jones took? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
$45 million Alex Jones has to pay to the victims of the to the parents of the Sandy Hook victims that he slandered for years on his show.
I mean, his attorney turning over his entire cell phone contents to the other side.
That was pretty funny.
Where do they find these attorneys?
Yeah.
I could have done better than that.
Joe Marshall says, I contacted the AG office and they passed the buck to the Alabama Department of Labor.
Well,
and of course.
Of course they did, but thanks for calling, Joe.
Yeah. Mr. Anderson says, shout out back to the YouTube chat. Shout out to the great reporting from Means Morning News.
Absolutely. We are huge fans of that program on this program.
Indeed.
And I think if you're looking for a way to have a concise, digestible size news program, 15 to 20 minutes, to give you the daily rundown, I don't know of anybody else doing it better.
Yeah.
And of course, what I love about it is very focused on labor, though not exclusive to labor, but
they got occasional UFO reports, and that's always fun.
That's true. Yeah. So definitely highly recommend Means Morning News. And also, I saw Strom mentioning in the chat about the American state and how it is not our friend. And I think,
that's true.
It's just everyday reminders of the ways in which state power is used to uphold our current status quo. And sometimes we have openings, little bits of space where we are able to kind of bend things to make a little bit of progress. It's not the norm. It's not the way it's set up.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of the state not being our friend, Travis McCoy in the Facebook chat, steward of the letter carriers locally here, said Starbucks hired a former CIA and Pinkerton operative for a regional intelligence position back in March. And that story just came out. Did you see that, Adam?
No, that's news to me. So they're hiring
CIA and Pinkerton operatives.
Wow.
Crazy stuff. Absolutely crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's very disturbing and not at all surprising, but it is disturbing.
Let's hit a couple of these, a couple short updates.
Well, we've got Matt in the Zoom.
Yeah, I want to.
Ready for Matt?
Let's hit these just for just really quick. The Scottsboro update, because
absolutely.
I want to make sure that we get to that. The Scottsboro update, and then we'll bring Matt on. So folks remember that a week and a half ago or so, 2 workers were fired at the Scottsboro, Alabama Starbucks location, and this is in the context of retaliation against working people at Starbucks all across the country. More Perfect Union has documented over 70 workers fired by Starbucks in retaliation across 20 states. We know these firings are in retaliation because of how absolutely stupid they are. In one case, a guy got fired because he was in the building too early. I have never been reprimanded for being too early on the job before. Just yesterday, they fired a 13-year veteran of the company in retaliation. This guy gave 13 years of his life to the company, and just like that, they cut him loose.
And there are folks who think that that's okay, who think that your boss should be allowed to do that without repercussion.
Like they owe nothing to you after you having given them 13 of the best years of your life. Spent most of your waking moments
you dare to
at
speak
work.
up, you dare to fight back. and your employment's yanked away from you. I really
absolutely crazy.
Wishing these workers all the best in the fights ahead, because I know something we've heard from some of our listeners is that we want to see the labor movement really rally behind these Starbucks workers as more and more folks are being fired, as stores are being closed. This is a pretty pivotal moment. It's a pretty make or break.
They're also closing some stores and blaming crime with right-wingers' help and spreading that message, despite the workers at those stores not actually wanting them to close.
Right.
Which would, presumably be the point, to protect the people under your employ. And these closings just so happen to have a much higher percentage of union stores than the general population.
Imagine that.
Very strange. 30% of these stores that they're closing are union, and only something like, is it 3% of their stores, if that, are unionized?
Right.
Vastly
disproportionate.
Vastly, whatever it is. They've got 9,000 stores and 200 that are unionized. So you do the math on that.
Right,
but the workers aren't, they're not taking these things lying down. They're taking them to court. They're striking. They're holding demonstrations to remind the bosses who makes the business run. And that brings me to last weekend, where we had, all told, about 40 or 50 community members from an array of organizations and over half a dozen unions come to support the Scottsboro Starbucks location. Let's put that picture up on the screen because it is really cool. Over half a dozen unions came to the Starbucks location in Scottsboro to show support for the workers there that are forming a union, and have raised over $2,000 to support the workers who were fired during this time and the workers who are still employed there and potentially facing lost hours and retaliation. They've got a goal of $3,000, and you can donate if you haven't yet at bit.ly/Scottsboro-relief. That is bit.ly/Scottsboro-relief. And mark your calendars, folks, because we are going to be doing it again. We're going to be doing it again right before ballots are due. We will be meeting on Sunday, August 14th. Sunday, 14 August at noon at the Scottsboro Starbucks location on John T. Reed Parkway. So be there or be square. And one more request to put out into the ether. They're looking for a union hall in the Scottsboro area to watch the count from virtually from the NLRB. And I don't think there's a union hall in Scottsboro, but maybe some of y'all know one. Let me know if there is, and I'll pass it on. But I'm thinking, unfortunately, that the closest union hall is going to be the IBEW hall on Clinton Avenue in Huntsville, and that's a bit of a drive. So if anybody knows of a union hall closer to Scottsboro than that, please let me know so I can pass that on to them.
But it was fantastic to see folks from all these different organizations and unions coming together for a righteous cause, and I really enjoyed the conversations that we had there. Got a chance to talk with Joe Marshall in person, and that was fantastic, and really hope that it kind of lifted some spirits of these very brave workers at Starbucks. I'm just incredibly proud of what they're doing and how they're organizing.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. So we have now, we've got Matt Bernico in the Zoom. Is that right?
Let's double check that. Yes, we do. Let me get him on the screen and unmuted.
Matt Bernico is co-host of the Magnificast, and he joins us now. Matt, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it.
Kind of. Yeah.
Hey, close the clean feed.
Yeah,
we're
somehow
still getting the.
We still got the
we're still getting
FM radio coming through.
Yeah, just
sorry about that, Matt.
Close that. But yeah, Matt Bernico is host of the Magnificast, co-host of the Magnificast. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So the Magnificast is a podcast about the intersection of leftist politics and Christianity. Talk to us about the podcast. Like what is it about beyond that, and what are you trying to do with it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I do the Magnificast with my best friend. I don't know. I'd say he's my best friend, Dean Detloff. He's great. So we put in an episode about every week where we kind of talk through the intersections of Christianity and leftist politics, really broadly construed. Sometimes we'll talk about a current event that is happening sort of in the religion beat. Sometimes we'll talk about something that's completely unrelated. Sometimes we'll talk about liberation theology or radical readings of the Bible. Sometimes we'll talk about what's happening with workers, who's on strike, or how that kind of works in the bigger scope of like political economy. So we're just two dudes with a podcast who are pretty interested in religion and the ways that religious people figure out, and like use their own language and rhetoric to talk about politics.
I think y'all do that really, really well. And
absolutely,
you mentioned that recently you've done a loose series sort of reading parables on the show in some interesting ways. Can you talk to us about that particular series that you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. A loose series is a great way to put it. We put out one episode every week, and sometimes in our, we have pretty hectic lives, I think. So sometimes it's just like struggling to find what we're going to do next. We found this really fascinating book by a New Testament scholar called William Herzog. William Herzog is like a sort of a historicist a historicist when it comes to the New Testament. So that's what he wants to know. Like, what in the New Testament did Jesus really say? What was added in later? How would the people who were listening to Jesus or the other sort of characters in the New Testament, how would they have heard those words? What would they have meant to them? So we did like 3 episodes around Jesus's parables. William Herzog, he has this book called Parables as Subversive Speech. And we found that book really interesting because when you crack it open, all of the parables that you've ever heard in church, at least in my case, are completely different when you kind of start viewing them as within like a historical context rather than just like how your pastor tells you to read them or something. So yeah, we started doing these episodes around those parables, and what we found was that the things that you go to church and you hear a parable and it's kind of like a nice fairy tale about like something really theological, something really high-minded, some kind of like pie in the sky kind of idea. But what the book points out to us and what we kind of been talking about on our podcast is that really, when you get down to it, Jesus is like giving really practical advice about politics. And if you know the historical part about that, you can kind of see that. Jesus becomes far less of like an otherworldly sort of theological figure when you read the Bible this way, and much more of like a political organizer. Like he's a guy that shows up to talk to like farmers and poor people and start conversations about the things that are really wrong in the world.
And I've really enjoyed listening to it. I grew up, I think, and both of y'all have talked about either growing up in or having brushes with evangelical Christianity. And, I hear a lot as somebody who kind of who grew up in a sort of evangelical Christianity as well. Sometimes I'll hear, and I told y'all this, like maybe quote unquote subversive or radical or liberal interpretations of scriptures. And I told y'all that the kids would say it sounds to me like cope, like copium, like they are really, really stretching, just because I've got those interpretations so deeply wedged, in my head that I think like if this is real at all, this is what it means. But y'all were talking about the one that really, really stuck out to me. Gosh, I think it was the one about the parable of the sower. And it really hit me like, oh, this sounds like that could be right. That sounds like this tracks. This makes sense. So could you give us a really quick, just a really quick overview, a review of that parable and maybe what it potentially actually means, or at least one viable interpretation that y'all talked about?
Yeah, so there's so many parables out there. It's hard to keep them all straight, that's for sure. The one that we talked about on the podcast, I think that you're referring to, is actually called the parable of the workers in the vineyard. That's in the there's a few of these. You know, when it comes to parables, it's like there's always a vineyard, there's always a king, there's always, you know, whatever, servants, all kinds of stuff, really agrarian sort of scenes, right? But the one that you're talking about is actually in the Gospel of Mark, and it's really interesting because it's the only book, it's the only gospel that this parable comes up in. I won't go into reading the entire the Bible verse on this on the radio here. That's maybe for a different radio station. But I'll give you the cliff notes here. So basically, in this parable in Mark, Jesus is telling a story to these who people who had been farmers, right? And the story goes like this. So there's a rich man who comes and buys up land in I don't know, wherever they are, you know, the turn of the millennium Palestine or whatever, Judea, who knows? I don't. Anyway, so there's a rich man that comes and buys up land and turns it into a vineyard. He hires a bunch of tenants to farm the vineyard, and it's going, you know, whatever. The thing. Oh, hang on. Before I get into the historical stuff, I'll keep going. It's going well, whatever. So as time progresses, the person who owns the land, who owns the vineyard, who came to buy it up, he starts sending people to collect rents for the vineyard, right? So, you know, he sends one person, and the tenants are like, they beat him up and they send him away. And then the landowner sends another person to come collect rents for the land, and they beat him up and send him away. And then the landowner kind of goes out on a pretty desperate limb, and instead of sending like another just like, I don't know, goon to extract rents, they send their son. And instead of beating him up and sending him away, the tenants are like, well, this is our chance. We're going to kill the son and take the land. So they do that in the story, right? And then this is the parable that Jesus is telling. So the way that that Christians read that story, I think, is pretty clear, right? It's like it's a story that foretells Jesus' death. We can like we kind of look at that story as sort of an analogy to the situation of Jesus coming to, you know, people and trying to collect the rents. I guess it's a weird metaphor, but, you know, in that story we kind of like assign all of the characters up and down to, you know, certain theological ideas. Like the person who buys up the land and owns the vineyard, we assume automatically is God, and the people who God sends to like get the rents from the people, those are the prophets. And then when God's, you know, the landowner sends a son, that's representative of Jesus. And in each one of these cases, we're supposed to associate ourselves with the like the sort of wicked tenants who beat up the people and whatever. That's like the overly theologized and allegoricalized version of that story. And what this book from William Herzog, the guy that we're kind of reading and studying here, is telling us is like, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not how the people who heard that story would have understood it themselves. So, and it's kind of funny because the author of this book, Herzog, he's like, well, you know, if you're talking to a bunch of like workers, like agricultural workers who are constantly being screwed over by landowners, they're not going to associate the person who owns their vineyard with God, right? That's not how it would work out. The landowner's the bad guy. Why would we think that? So the historicized reading goes a little something different, right? So instead of these landowners being like, you know, like it tries to answer the question, why are these tenants like beating up the son? Like, why do they think that you know, that would work or whatever? So the historicized reading explains that like it's not actually a theological allegory at all. It's actually just like a story about like peasant revolts and how they would happen often. And the way that this story works in the gospel is that it's not really about another world at all. It's not about Jesus' death at all. Jesus is just saying, hey, peasant revolts have never worked. So maybe don't try that. Don't try to kill your landowner's son. Instead, what else should you do? Because that's the interesting part about parables too, is that they're not sort of like stories that are encapsulated within themselves. They're like the beginning of like a teaching or organizing moment that you might have with somebody, right? Jesus tells that story, and then at the end is like, okay, so what would you do next? If peasant revolts are not the way forward, what would you do next to maybe like get this awful landowner off your back or something, right? So there's a whole bunch of other like historical context that I'm happy to talk about if you want, but that's kind of like the crux of these episodes that we've been doing. You know, we have certain ways of reading the parables in really allegorical ways. But if you think about them historically and kind of you do this like the homework, which there's a lot of it, and learn about the ancient world and how all this works, what you get is Jesus is far more of like a political organizer. He's interested in labor. He's interested in the problems that people just run into in their lives, and less so about like what happens when you die, or if he's, the son of God or something like that. I mean, those things are important, but like they're not the main pieces of these stories, right? There's something else going on that's sort of deeper in them.
Yeah, I think that I think the light bulb really turned off when you mentioned about, like, during this time, the peasants were super, super exploited by the landowners, by the people who are going to come and buy their vineyards. And so why would it be exactly that I associate, it would be like today telling a parable about Amazon and including Jeff Bezos and then trying to make the assumption that an Amazon worker is going to think Bezos is God in the analogy. Like, why would you think that? As an Amazon worker, somebody telling you a parable about Jeff Bezos, why would you think that he is analogous to God in this situation? And so that was really fascinating to me. And then I think once you start thinking that way, a lot of the other stuff kind of fall into place and make a lot more sense. Because that's what they do. Every time you hear about a vineyard, every time you hear about something, the landowner, the king, is always assumed in evangelical sermons to be the allegory to God. And I think there's a lot of value in questioning that assumption.
Totally. It's so bonkers that that's how we've just sort of learned to read the Bible. Like, it's the ways that extremely like owner class sort of people have come to shape the way that even our religion works, which is bonkers.
It would definitely be convenient for somebody like Bezos that he would be the God, allegory in a story. It's like works out super well for him, actually.
Yeah. I've been off the podcast. I've been reading this book along with some people at my church that I go to, and they're finding it really fascinating. So the other night, we met and we read a parable. It's in the Gospel of Matthew, but it shows up in a bunch of places. And I'm sure people are kind of familiar with this one. It's a little bit more, I don't know, popular, I guess. But it's Matthew 18, and it's called the Parable of the Unrepentant Servant. And it's a really interesting one because the basic story is that there's like this king, and there's a servant that comes to him. And the servant owes the king like an unimaginable debt, just like basically what is the equivalent of $1 gazillion, right? And the king says, yeah, sure, I forgive this debt from you, no problem. And then in turn, the servant goes out and finds somebody who owes him money and basically strangles him until this person pays. And then the other servants go back to the king and say, listen, this guy, you just forgave his money, you forgave his debt, and now he's out here beating up people to collect debts. What's going on there? And the king like tortures him or whatever, right? So this is another one of those parables where, again, people assume that the king that tortures people is God, and that the servant here is us. And it's about like sort of grace and forgiving of debts. And there's something cool about that. I mean, that's great, whatever. But in the historicized reading, the end becomes like, well, the king obviously wouldn't have been God to the people who were hearing it, because like kings were not great. They're like an imperialist sort of occupying force. It's like the Romans and so on, right? But in the historicized reading, the end is actually about like, what if there was a sort of politician or, a popular politician who did something for you, like forgave your debts or something, right? What if they did that? But fundamentally, nothing else changed in society. Like it's a story about like a Messiah who comes and like does something for you. That's really nice, but nothing fundamentally changes systemically. So it's a more interesting reading of the story because that's really good political advice, I think,
right
now.
A lot
right?
of parallels to the nonprofit industry, the charities, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, so I was reading with people at my church and we're kind of having a conversation about it. And they're like, well, that makes complete sense, right? Because if you were to tell a similar parable today, like who would be the king in the story? I mean, it's Joe Biden, it's Donald Trump, right? And we would never think those guys are the good guys. So it's just like, right. Just kind of a silly assumption to bring to the Bible. But it's important because we're always bringing our own assumptions to biblical texts and things like that. So it's good to kind of get like a different perspective that gives you a different ending to the story.
Yeah, I think so. And so we can kind of shift gears a little bit, because the first thing or the thing that a couple of months ago that I ran across that I was like, oh, this would be a good reason to get him on the show, is you wrote an article for Sojourners about Christianity and labor, and that we need organized labor, or organized religion maybe needs to be more into organized labor, something like that. Talk to us about that article and the impetus for it. Like, what was it that made you want to write that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. Yeah, the article's in Sojourners. You can go find it there. It's called "Recent Union Wins Mean It's Time for More Organized Religion." Apart from my podcast, I'm a labor organizer, and that's great. I love doing that. And I think what's really interesting about, like a strike or a labor action or, whatever, all kinds of those things. I don't think I've ever been to one where clergy members don't show up. There's always a priest, there's always a pastor, there's always, maybe some nuns or an imam or, anyone, a rabbi, they always show up. And that's awesome. I'm super psyched about that. Super psyched to see sort of like faith leaders come and be moral voices on a strike line or on, at a labor action. I think that's really great. But I guess what's a bummer about that is that rarely do you see an entire congregation show up, or you see a handful of like clergy, but you don't see all the regular people. And yeah, I don't know, sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes labor actions are planned at times when people are working or whatever. But I guess it just occurred to me that labor and community support is something that religious people of any faith tradition should be really invested in, I think. My context is Christianity, so I think it makes a lot of sense. So in that article that I wrote for Sojourners, I'm kind of talking about this a liberation theologian from El Salvador. He's a Jesuit. His name is Ignacio Ellacuria. He is a really fantastic theologian, and was also put his life on the line basically for what he believed in El Salvador, and was killed because of it. Sort of, he's martyred. But he writes this, he has this essay that's called "The Crucified People." And it's really an interesting essay because it's asking questions about did Jesus have to die on the cross or something? And this is a big question that I guess plagues some Christians, an interesting theological question, right? Is that necessary? And Ellacuria says it's only necessary insofar as that all people like Jesus end up on the cross in one way or the other, right? All people who are kind of that class that he calls the crucified people, all people who are workers, people who get low wages, people who are exploited by their bosses and their landlords, they always end up crucified by the system, right? That's kind of the takeaway from this text. And if that's the case, then what it means to be a person who thinks something important about Jesus, whether you think he's the Son of God or you think he's just a really cool guy, both I guess are fine in my case, so I don't know. But if you think Jesus is an important character, or he represents something powerful or noteworthy, then it's you should also not just be on Jesus' side, but you should be on the side of all the people who are just like Jesus in the world. All of the people who show up to work and have their wages stolen, or they get their union bust, or they get sexually harassed on the job, or whatever, right? Those are all people who are, for the most part, they have more in common with Jesus than they have in common with CEOs and their bosses, right? So in the essay, I'm kind of arguing that out and saying if you're a Christian and you think Jesus is really great, then you should think all these other people are really great too. And the interesting part is that putting it in historical context, like I was just talking about, right? If you were there for the crucifixion of Jesus, you wouldn't just hang your head and be well, I guess this is the way it has to be. No, you'd be really mad. You'd be really incensed that a guy who you think is great is getting executed by the state, and you would try to stop it probably. And I think that's kind of the impetus for people who are Christians. If you think that Jesus is really great, then you have to recognize that people are struggling just like Jesus did, and they're being crucified just like Jesus did, and I guess more metaphorical ways. But we have to show up for them, right? We can't let them be crucified. That's nonsense. We have to show up for them and try to take them down off that cross, or whatever that might mean in the situation. show up to their workplace and yell at their boss, or make sure that they get a union election that's fair, or make sure their wages aren't getting stolen, but that their boss thinks that they can get away with it, right? So that's what I was basically arguing. And then at the end, I kind of just give a handful of like practical steps for churches that want to get involved with labor. I think that's really important. If you go to a church and your church is not involved in labor, what are you doing? Call your local union, get somebody to come out and talk to you, figure out how you can start showing up for labor actions. It's all really, I think, really important. I think that it's, yeah, I mean, if Christians and churches want to remain relevant in a way that's not just, for Christian nationalists or whatever, this is the way to do it, showing up on strike lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, I think so. And I think it's important. And I think that, like you said, there's a certain amount of, moral strength that comes from, places like the church and clergy folks. But it would definitely be amplified by seeing more of their congregants out there and seeing, that people are taking what they're saying seriously about these sorts of, issues. Why do you think it is that that this doesn't happen more than it does?
It's a super good question, and it's a hard one to answer too. I think that there's a few reasons, right? Like, I mean, first and foremost, I think the biggest reason is that it is the right, not leftists, not liberals, who have organized the church in the last 50 years or so. Yeah. So when it comes to evangelical denominations and even Catholic denominations, even mainline Protestant denominations, the right has a far sort of stronger grasp on those spaces than the left does. So I guess that's at least the frame that I work off of, right? So like, why aren't people showing up? It's because people don't know to show up. They don't know that that their voices are valuable in those spots, right? And I think also it's I mean, we can't just be sort of like, well, it's the right's fault, but it's also because we don't think of churches in the same way as we think of like our workplaces or our schools or whatever. Churches are places that we ought to organize just like anywhere else. There's a group of people, and maybe you like them, maybe you don't. I don't know. Churches can be complicated for sure, right? But they're places to have conversations about politics. They're places where you can organize people to show up to things, to get involved in things. And I think those are the reasons. Christianity has been largely held captive by the right, and I think that we just don't think of them as places to organize, but we ought to.
I think that is just excellent, and I think that's something that we don't think about enough, and I really appreciate you making that point, because most of us on the left, we don't see churches as an organizing space, and we do have complicated relationships with the churches. But I think that's so important, and there are relationships there in churches that are pre-existing, right? I mean, you're not having to create these relationships out of thin air. There's something there. There's something bringing you together. There's probably a lot of shared history. So I think that's an excellent point, and I really wanted to echo that. And I liked your quote there, that it's the right that has organized the churches. So if we can acknowledge that it needs to happen, it's possible. We acknowledge that we have lost so far greatly. Really, I would argue, at least since the New Deal is, I guess, when things really started to shift, is my understanding, and escalated, obviously, much more recently in the last 4 or 5 decades. But I really, what I dig about what you guys are doing on the Magnificast is that, it's one thing for us to say, like in the abstract, that we get the ideologies, the ruling ideologies of the day, or the ruling class's ideology, but to see how y'all can really break it down in terms of the church, in terms of how the teachings of Jesus, how the words in the Bible have been interpreted, and how they've been passed on to so many of us, and how that really reflects capitalist. It does not reflect labor, which would be the vast majority of us. So I really like that. I think it's necessary. I grew up being raised Southern Baptist. Jacob grew up in the Holiness Church. I think there's a whole lot of us out there who were raised in churches, and particularly evangelical churches, where we got those sort of interpretations. And so it's refreshing to see a different perspective on that. And those are the types of perspectives that have helped me to reevaluate what do I believe and what do I think, because like a lot of lefties, I had the upbringing and then ran away from it. But there's a lot more nuance there, and that's I really appreciate what y'all do to kind of bring that nuance out, and have those conversations about what does it mean to be a labor unionist and someone dedicated to the working class in relationship with Christianity.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not a particular missionary oriented person in the sense that I think people should be Christians or come to church. Whatever you do what's good for you for sure. Don't you do you is right. Don't if you grew up in the church and it messed you up, don't worry about it. Don't worry about trying to find your way back in if you don't want to, I guess. But that being said, I think that there's something really important about religion in the United States and kind of understanding it if we want to be really good at activating some kind of social movement, right? Religion is a big deal in the United States, and
especially
that doesn't
here in
always
the South.
Totally, yeah, right. And that doesn't always mean church, right? Because a lot of people who would maybe identify as being spiritual, but not like the person that goes to church or something, right? You might think of yourself a Christian, but you don't go to church at all. Whatever, that's cool. But yeah, I think if we kind of leave out that cultural space in our organizing, we're really missing out. But it's also the case too, that when it comes to a union election or a drive or something, your community is not going to win that for you. Whether or not you have clergy people show up is not going to win that for you. But it's not bad to have a community of people at your back that can show up and yell at your boss or something.
Right.
And like you said, we have to organize the population that we have, and at least still to this day, there's a significant number of people who are religious, or who have certainly been influenced by religion, predominantly Christianity, but not exclusively. And we have to be able to have conversations with those folks. And I think one thing that's really stuck with me over the last couple of years, for sure, is some of the language that Cornel West uses in terms of, love is what justice looks like in public, and kind of thinking about the intersection of love and justice and solidarity, and how those concepts really, interlock, how they are expressed. And so I think those are important conversations to have, and I think we're seeing something in this country, sort of a revival of the left, or at least it appears so, and a revival of the labor movement. And I'm just going to be watching to see is there a revival in this particular type of religion or Christianity that is more focused on justice, that is more learning lessons from Jesus, the political organizer. We'll see how that plays out. I don't know. I don't have those answers, but I think it's fair to say that given the state of our world, given the state of our country, there is probably a spiritual yearning among folks. We can see what the widespread statistics in terms of depression and anxiety and other diseases and deaths of despair. And I think the conditions continue to deteriorate. And so whether you're spiritual at all, as materialist as you may be, there's still something affecting the psyche of our people. So
and
that's I'm going to be kind of watching to see how does this all play out.
Well, and you mentioned that about love and justice, and something that I've been listening to. I think it was probably David Inchauskas. I was listening to his podcast, the Liberation Theology podcast, and he quoted a scripture about thirsting for justice, and I was like, that's interesting. I don't recall ever hearing that, and so I looked it up, and in the Catholic Bible, apparently, that's the way it's interpreted. But in like King James and a lot of other like Protestant associated translations, it's thirsting for righteousness, and I think that really sums up the different focus that you have between some, more culturally conservative churches and some that are more social justice oriented, is that you've got one group of folks that are talking about a thirsting for justice, which is the connotation there is like there's a societal implication to justice. You don't think about justice like internally. You think about justice externally. You think about justice collectively. And then these other group of churches who are talking about thirsting for righteousness, which seems to me to have an individual purity type of connotation, like, thirsting for the ability, like, not to drink, or not to give into temptation and go to this ball game next weekend, right? And that's the kind of thing that I grew up in, is that, we're supposed to be thirsting for righteousness so that we are individually good enough. And the idea that there is a legitimate way to interpret even just that verse in a way that is thirsting for justice collectively in our society really spoke a lot to me, and I think really sums up well what y'all are doing at the Magnificast and what a lot of other people are doing in church and in small groups across the country that are really exciting.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that distinction between righteousness and justice is so funny. It's just a translation problem, right? And and how that works out.
But
it makes
so
a lot
much deeper, right? I mean, it represents so much.
Totally, because you hear the word righteousness and you think of sort of an individual type of virtue or something, that you're a righteous guy. Right. Not really a phrase we use anymore. But it signals something different than the word justice. But I grew up in church hearing righteousness a lot, righteousness language, and I always remember the first time I went to sort of a different sort of church, and I don't know if you're familiar. There's a Bible verse. It's in Amos, which is one of the prophets in the Old Testament. It's it's like, let justice roll down as waters, right? Mm-hmm. And but I grew up hearing that differently, as like righteousness roll down as waters, and it's like, well, it's a different feeling. It's a different feeling. A waterfall of your personal sort of like goodness in the world is different than a waterfall of justice crushing down on people, right? So yeah, I think that, the Bible has a lot of like moral language that's really interesting, that's also couched in really particular sort of historical contexts. But they've been covered over, I think, in a lot of cases. One thing that comes to mind, whenever people ask me about like why I think Christianity is radical or important for labor organizers to think about, I always think about James. So James is it's a letter that is written in the New Testament, and it's one of my favorite Bible verses. So in James 5, there's a Bible verse that's titled "Warning to Rich Oppressors." And it's pretty fiery, basically, right?
Yeah,
it says
that's one of my favorite verses.
yeah. So the verse says that the wages of the laborer who mowed your fields, which you kept back in fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord. I love that because, wage theft is a super rampant problem in the world, especially amongst low wage workers. There was a survey that SEIU did a little bit earlier, right before the summer, like in May. And it was about fast food workers in California and wage theft. And the survey found that 85% of fast food workers in California suffered from wage theft. And I guess that sucks. It's awful, right? It's like the worst thing I can imagine.
Overwhelming. No,
yeah, totally. And people lose billions every year in wage theft. But in the Bible, tell your pastor, tell your religious friends that when workers have wages stolen from them, God hears it directly and God's mad about it. is what
The
James
Department
tells
of
us later
Labor may not hear about it.
But God knows
right.
about
The
it.
Attorney
Yeah.
General not listening.
Yeah,
God
and you know, the King James version is definitely very cryptic and difficult to understand sometimes, and maybe there are some issues with the translation. But the King James version of James 5 is very, very metal. I don't know if you've ever, but this is what it says. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Yeah, it's super metal. Very, very cool.
That's got me ready.
Your wealth is a canker is a great line. I love that. Speaking of translations, so there's another translation that a lot of Protestants use called the Message, and it's like a sort of like updated language. I gotta say, I think I have like a lot of criticisms of it, but when it comes to James 5, it does rule. It's at the very end. It says, "You've looted the earth and lived it up, but all you'll have to show for it is a fatter than usual corpse." It's like, oh my god, yeah,
that's good.
yeah. So, I mean, you know, I think what's interesting though about all of these types of Bible verses is that they speak to there's a real impetus within the Christian tradition and within like the Bible that we ought to care about justice, and that God cares about justice. And, you know, it's not just anyone's justice. It's always sort of a justice on the side of somebody. It's just on the side of the poor every single time, right? So I think that's pretty important. I mean, whether or not you believe in God, whatever. It's complicated, right? Things are very hard to figure out. But you do have to recognize that there is a certain type of language that's like embedded within faith traditions that is moral. And I think it's good to figure out how to use those in organizing conversations, in struggles against bosses and CEOs. I think it's a great sort of thing to have in your toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I appreciate your time. They have a podcast. Matt and Dean have a podcast called The Magnificast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. One of the other parables that they talked about was the parable of the talents, which, as we all good evangelical people know, the guy who did not double his talents was bad. And actually, perhaps he was the good guy. Perhaps he was the good guy. So I'm not going to spoil it for you anymore. Go check out that episode. Go check out the Magnificast and Matt Bernico. Matt, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Keep up the good work.
All right, folks. Yeah, definitely check that out. The lazy servant actually might be the good guy.
I was a big fan of their series around Easter time. Really got into that, diving into some liberation theology.
Yeah.
You know, I have, like probably most of you listening, sort of a complicated relationship with all this. But it has been helpful to view this through the framework of love, justice, and solidarity. And there was a comment in the chat from Ron that really resonated, which is that in the antebellum era, in the South, the church was a reactionary force, right? They were pro-slavery. In the North, generally speaking, more progressive, and much of the abolitionist movement was grounded in their religious faith. And I think that's a good reminder that we can't view it as a complete monolith.
Right.
It's a lot more nuanced than that. Some folks are driven to organize their co-workers and fight for a better world because of their faith, just as much as there are folks who are committing hate crimes and terrorism because of their faith, and other forms of bigotry and violence. So it's more complicated than it seems sometimes. And I think I really like his point about, you know, we have to be showing up in those spaces just as folks from those spaces need to show up for us.
Yep. I think that's probably going to be the last of the big stuff. We had a couple of other things, but I think that we may have to pre-tape next week, so we may save it. But I'm gonna we're gonna go over this one more really quick story before we wrap, because I can't not talk about it because of the absurdity of it. We know and love Jonah Furman, staff writer for Labor Notes. And last week his kid lost a shoe.
That's never fun.
Yeah. So he tweeted about it. He said, "I lost my son's Croc on a 1-mile walk in the Forest Glen area of Silver Spring, Maryland, and he demands its return." Very fiery kid. I'm envisioning a viral tweet thing where somehow we find it. Thank you. So it did go viral, and it went viral enough that a local news station ran with it. ABC 7 News. And folks, I'm happy to report that he got it. Let's throw that tweet up where he got the...
Unfortunately, we don't have any of these graphics loaded for this segment.
We don't?
No, that's okay, though.
My bad. Well, yeah, so the guy who found it said he saw it on his MSN homepage.
Of all things. Of all things, that's where he found it.
Yeah.
So there we go. There's an example of social media actually doing something positive.
Yeah.
It's rare to see that, rare to hear that. But Jonah's kid got his shoes back. Hell yeah.
All right, folks. We appreciate your time. Got a good show lined up for you next week. And make sure that you buy our new shirts. You've got your pre-order in. We're going to be closing.
Get those orders in, y'all.
Yeah, going to be closing that probably on like the 16th or the 17th or something, so we can try to get those in by September. Want to try to make it so that people can wear them during the Labor Notes Alabama Troublemaker School that's going to be in October. So yeah, get those orders in. Support the show if you have the means and you think that it's cool. Share it, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, the liking and the sharing and the commenting, it does make a difference.
That's what they tell us anyway.
Yeah, and we really appreciate it. Just and we love when we encounter new folks who, like our caller this morning,
that was
first-time listener, and generate a whole conversation about organizing and starting a union, and that's why we do this show.
Yeah. All right, folks. We'll see you next week.